one morning to introduce our study of E, not least because the words and melody are very lovely, as were those of Drink to me only with thine eyes, which were used to introduce the letter D.
Sadly, however, we don't know by whom or exactly when Early One Morning was written. It's simply a traditional English folk song, dating back at least to the early 19th century.
Apart from being beautiful to listen to and to sing, it has a good variety of some of the interesting sounds that E can make, or be involved in making. Early and heard, deceive and leave, maiden, never, and me.
Like all the vowels, E can have short and long sounds, but it can also be silent. And the introductory sentence, which you are about to hear, in which it appears in every word, shows how much its sound can vary, particularly in relation to stress and in combination with other letters.
As it is such a big study, we have divided it into 3 sections. The first covers the short E sounds, the second the long E sounds, and the third begins with silent E and goes on to examine the sounds that E can make when combined with other vowels. I have asked Pandora and Bertie to start us off and take us through the first section, the short E sounds.
Eugene's wife Eileen knew her children eventually fell asleep easily there when she read them their favourite bedtime stories.
That's quite a lot of sounds and quite a lot of combinations of letters making them. But take heart, it's not as bad as it seems.
We'll do the sensible thing. Start at the beginning and proceed steadily to the end. And when we've gone through the variations in turn and practiced them all, you will find E much easier, I'm sure.
The first 2 short sounds of E are quite similar to those of A, and before making the short E1 sound of the word end, we'll go back to the simple short A1 sound of ant. Watch and listen as I make the sound. Ah, ah, ant.
The short E1 sound can in fact be produced with no obvious external change in the mouth shape, as I'll show you now. A, eh, ant, end, ant, end.
Though it can sometimes help in practicing short E1 to widen your lips slightly and raise the back part of your tongue slightly as you make the sound. Watch as I show you. End.
But the real difference is in the way you produce the air. The sound for short E1 is not made as far back in the throat as it is for short A1. You must feel the air against your palate only a little behind the centre.
Actually, it's easier to make these sounds than to describe how to do so, and I want you to listen and watch again carefully, then copy the sounds I make. Ah, ah, ant, end, ant, end.
Now you make the 2 sounds and say those 2 words.
And here are some more words to practice the short E1 sound. Listen first.
Bed, beg, ben, bend, blend, bless, bet, sell.
Egg, entry, exact, accept, extend, extra.
Hen, lend, men, mend, neck, pen, red, sell, scent.
Set, spend, tent, tell, trend, vent, when.
Now you repeat those words exactly as we said them.
And let's make up a little sentence in which every E vowel is short E1. Watch and listen first.
Ben lent Fred 10 eggs.
Now you tell us about Ben's lending Fred 10 eggs.
And now we'll have a sentence with a mixture of short A1 and short E1 vowels. Watch and listen carefully.
Andy lent Ben Jack Sprat's 10 tent pegs.
It's a silly sentence, but it's good for practice. You try it now.
And before we leave short E1 for the present, let's just note some other letter combinations that make the same sound. For example, EA, as in bread, dead, and ready.
And the unusual sounds of AI in said and of IE in friend.
Now you say those words.
The short E2 sound is a very common one, not least because it is the sound of the letter E in the definite article, the, except when it is followed by a word beginning with a vowel or is emphatic, as we shall practice in a moment.
It's the same sound as short A2, our old friend Ivy, the indefinite vowel, in a different short dress.
Let's go back again to the letter A. Remember how we practiced saying a balance and a palace, in which the indefinite article and the second A of balance and palace both had the same Ivy sound. Now let's substitute the definite article for the indefinite, and we'll hear that the vowel sounds are the same. The balance, the palace.
The balance, the palace. Let's remind ourselves how to make the Ivy sound in its guise of short E2. It's very simple.
Begin with your mouth slightly open and relaxed, with your tongue against the back of your bottom teeth. Then project a little air quickly from the back of your throat against the front of the roof of your mouth, almost like a refined grunt.
Watch and listen as I make the sound. The, the.
This is also the sound made by E in the comparative ending ER, as in better or wetter, the letter R being virtually silent and less followed by a word beginning with a vowel, as in better endings, compared with better sense.
Now you practice making the short E2 Ivy sound and saying the definite article as it sounded before consonants and those words.
In the words better and wetter, you heard short E1, followed by short E2. And now we'll have a practice sentence with a mixture of the two sounds, together with some examples of silent E, which is marked by an asterisk. Listen carefully now.
The better sentence expressed excellent sense.
Now you say that sentence, first with the help of the marked text, then reading from the following unmarked version.
Now listen to some more examples of ER word endings with the short E2 sound. The following are all nouns or verbs, or sometimes both.
Answer, cancer, danger, endanger, summer, winter.
Banker, disaster, enter, girder, gunner, hunter, master, murder, murderer.
Plaster, plasterer, sander, sender, shower, splinter, tower, vintner, water, daughter, slaughter.
Now you practice those words.
And note the difference in pronunciation of drawer when it means someone who draws something, and the drawer in a chest of drawers.
There is no difference in stress, but in the first case the separate short E2 is clear and distinct, but in the second it is just part of the weak R, which, as we discussed earlier, is itself little more than a very short ivy sound.
Listen again. Someone who draws something is a
Drawer,
but what you open and close in a desk is a
drawer.
And now we'll have some comparative adjectives to practice. Listen to these.
Bigger, smaller.
Brighter, darker.
Taller, shorter.
Nicer, nastier.
Prettier, uglier.
Cleverer, stupider.
Faster, slower.
Upper, lower. Now you say those comparative adjectives.
However, not all ER word endings have the short E2 sound. Just as ATE endings can be long A1, as in the verb estimate, and short A2, as in the noun estimate, when we look at long E2, we'll see a similar difference if the syllable is stressed, as in refer, or unstressed, as in differ, although, as usual, there are exceptions.
But for now, let's practice some ENCE and ENT endings, and see how they have the short E1 sound if stressed, and short E2, the ivy sound, if unstressed.
Listen first to some examples in which the ending is stressed and therefore has the short E1 sound. Content, content, dissent, intent, invent, prevent, relent, repent.
Commence, fence, offence, pence, pretense, thence.
And note that the noun content, more usually found in the plural, contents, is not an exception to the rule, for although the main stress is on the first syllable in the noun, in contrast to the adjective content, in which the first syllable is unstressed, there is also significant stress on the noun's second syllable, content.
Now you say those words ending in ENCE or ENT, in which this ending is stressed.
Even if, as in the case of the noun content, the ending does not have the main stress of the word.
Now listen to some unstressed short E2 endings, and note that these include words ending in MENT, as in management. Benevolence, benevolent.
Cadence, continence, continent, convalescence, convalescent.
Decadence, decadent. Deterrence, deterrent.
Eminence, eminent, evidence, evident.
Coincidence, incident. Imminent, innocence. Innocent, intelligence, intelligent.
Silence, silent, superintendence, superintendent. Violence, violent, parent, encouragement, management.
Conscience, deference, essence, inference, interference, reference, science, sentence, repentant, repentance.
Did you notice that those last two words, repentant and repentance, ended in ANT and ANCE, not ENT and ENCE? Confusing these pairs of word endings is a common spelling mistake because the ivy vowel sound of the last syllable is the same.
Note too that it was not only all the E vowels that had the ivy sound in those words when unstressed, but also all the unstressed vowels A and O, for example, the A in decadence and the O in innocence.
Now you say all those examples of unstressed ENCE and ENT word endings, including repentant and repentance, with our identically sounding ANT and ANCE endings.
We've given you rather a lot of examples, I know, but we are not repentant because they are all very useful words. You'll find them spread over 2 screens for your practice session.
The same principle of stress governs the suffix less. While the simple word less has the short E1 sound, this changes to the short E2 IV sound when the syllable is an unstressed suffix. For example, brainless,
Careless,
feckless,
hairless,
humorless.
mindless.
Now you say those adjectives. And now listen to this stern judge's opinion.
The harsher the sentence, the greater the deterrence.
Now you repeat this stern pronouncement.
Three other word endings that often make the short E2 sound are the unstressed endings RE, LE and EL, as in theatre, able and label.
Sometimes they're regarded as examples of silent E, with only the consonant being sounded, but we feel they're better understood as examples of the short E2 sound, however slightly this is pronounced, except where the purpose of a final E is solely to lengthen the preceding vowel from which it is separated by L or R, as in pale and bear.
In these cases we hear only the consonant sound, and it would be wrong to try to put in an IV sound and say pale instead of pale.
The sound of the RE ending of theatre is exactly the same as if it had been spelt with ER at the end.
Which is how the Americans spell it.
Similarly, we have meter, a measuring device, and meter, the unit of measurement, words which are identically pronounced.
Note again, however, that the RE ending has this sound only when it is preceded by a consonant, as in theatre and meter. Where it is preceded by a vowel, including Y when used as a vowel, as in ta or ba, the final E is simply the silent E that changes the preceding vowel, turning bar, for example, into bear, and the R is so weak as to be almost silent too.
Unless it is followed by a sounded vowel, as in bar all or bare ankles.
Listen now to some RE endings preceded by a consonant, and therefore having the short E2 sound, many of them, as you will see, being adoptions from French.
Acre, goiter, theatre, liter, manoeuvre.
Meter, ochre, ogre, sabre.
Now you say those words, and note carefully the spelling of manoeuvre.
And now listen to some words with unstressed LE endings. Able, disable, amble, angle, ankle, apple, article, axle.
Babble, battle, Bible, bubble.
Cable, cancel, candle, cattle, cobble, crackle, curdle.
Dabble, dribble.
Fable, fickle.
Gable, gabble.
Handle, horrible, terrible.
Kettle, little, mangle, strangle.
Rabble, sable, saddle, scrabble, stable, sensible, subtle, table.
Tickle, ample, pimple, simple, sample, trample, treble, twinkle.
ripple, scribble, squabble, settle, particle.
Tipple, trifle, stifle, stubble, trouble, wobble, credible.
And incredible. Now you say those words.
Now listen to examples of unstressed EL endings. Angel, apparel, barrel, camel, channel, chattel.
Damsel, enamel, flannel, gravel, handle.
Infidel, label, panel, impanel, pastel, quarrel.
Satchel, shrapnel, sorrel, spaniel, trammel, travel, unravel.
Now you say those words.
And let's not forget the two famous towers, Eiffel in Paris
And Babel in the Bible.
and there are other biblical names like Abel, Bethel, Samuel and Rachel, in which the EL suffix derives from the Hebrew word for God.
Note too that the short E2 ivy sound is more prominent where EL follows the letter U, as in cruel, jewel, fuel, gruel, etc.
But now we must observe the effect of stress again in regard to EL word endings. You will remember that when we studied the unstressed AL word endings, which have the same sound as the unstressed EL ones we've just been looking at, we noted that in a very few words like canal, cabal and halal, in which the AL ending is stressed, it has the short A1 sound and not the short A2 ivy sound of words like arrival.
We can now note a similar difference with words ending in EL, where that syllable is stressed, and there are many more of these than was the case with AL endings. When the EL ending is stressed, it has the short E1 sound, as in the following examples.
Compel, dispel, expel, impel, propel, repel.
Brunel, carousel, cartel, excel, hotel, lapel, motel, muscatel.
Nobel, Patel, personnel, Raquel.
Now you say those words and names with stressed EL endings that have the short E1 sound. All the words in the first line of examples, those ending in the syllable PEL, derive from the Latin word pellere, which means to drive or thrust. And we're not in fact dealing with a true EL suffix in these cases.
They always have the stress on the syllable PEL in all forms of the verb and its derivatives, and the E always has the short E1 sound. Listen carefully as we say the following.
Compel, compelling, compelled.
Dispel, dispelling, dispelled.
Expel, expelling, expelled.
Impel, impelling, impelled, impeller.
Propel, propelling, propelled. Propeller, propellant.
Repel, repelling, repelled, repellent.
And you may have noticed that the sound of the prefix RE is neither short E1 nor short E2. This is something that we shall come to in a moment. For the present, let's just continue with the endings.
Note that EL endings also have the short E1 sound when they carry a secondary stress in a word. You will see and hear in the following examples of words of 3 or more syllables that the main stress of the word is on the first syllable, but there is a secondary stress on the final syllable too.
We've marked the main stress with a bold underline and the secondary stress with a lighter underline, while the ivy sounds are in italics. Listen carefully now.
Annabelle, caramel, citadel, Isabel, parallel, pimpernel.
Now you say those words, copying the pronunciation exactly.
Though note that caramel and citadel may also be pronounced correctly without any stress on the last syllable, in which case the sound becomes short E2. Caramel and citadel.
The last word in the list, pimpernel, is the name of a little flower which was made famous by the novel The Scarlet Pimpernel, set in the time of the French Revolution. You may have read it or seen one of the many films made of it, but if you have not done so, do read it and get a DVD of the film.
Actually, the story was written by Baroness Auxier at my great-aunt's house in Bearsted, just down the road from here. It's an exciting story of an English aristocrat, Sir Percy Blakeney, who, hiding his true identity under that sobriquet, and by the pretence of being as stupid as he is rich, organises and carries out daring rescues of French aristocrats and their families condemned to the guillotine.
We seek him here, we seek him there, those Frenchies seek him everywhere. Is he in heaven? Is he in hell? That damned elusive Pimpernel.
And don't worry about demmed. It isn't a new word or a misprint, just the affected aristocratic pronunciation of damned in that age of silver snuff boxes and powdered wigs. It's like saying "my dear" instead of "my dear."
And this type of affectation lives on in law courts, where the bewigged judge is addressed as "my lud" instead of "my lord." And why lord at all, unless the judge happens to be a peer of the realm, is another oddity.
And while we are thinking of the French, we can also usefully note here the pronunciation of clientèle, which is adopted from the French and retains the French sound in the first syllable, the I having a long E sound and the following E a nasal short O sound, in contrast to the English word client. The ELE ending, however, is shortened to the sharper English short E1 sound, as it is in the woman's name Adele.
But note that the man's name, Noel, in which the ending is unstressed, has the short E2 Ivy sound, which is very appropriate as Noel Coward's favourite restaurant in London was the Ivy.
Listen to this little sentence. Adele is the best client among Noel Spencer's clientele.
Now you tell us who Noel's best client is among all his clientele, and when you are ready, use the following unmarked text.
Note too how the change of stress alters the sound of the letter E in infidel, in which the unstressed EL syllable has the short E2 sound, and infidelity, where the same syllable becomes stressed and changes to short E1.
Similarly, a change of stress and consequent change of pronunciation distinguishes the noun rebel, which has short E1 followed by short E2, from the verb rebel, in which the second syllable, now stressed, changes from short E2 to short E1, while the first changes to short E3, which we shall practice next.
The short E3 sound is the sound we hear, for example, in the first E of event, the last syllable of brushes,
and the ed endings of the past tense and past participle forms of verbs, and the adjectives derived from them, but only where the preceding letter is either D or T, as in ended or scented. Where the ed ending follows any other letter, the E is usually silent, as in dined, climbed, and baked.
but we'll discuss this further, and the exceptions, when we come to silent E. For the present, let's make sure we can pronounce short E3 correctly and understand how it differs from the first two short E sounds and from the short I sound of in.
Watch and listen very carefully now as we pronounce the four sounds in order, then words containing them, the short I sound being marked as 4.
I. Rent, renter, rented, renting.
I. Rent, renter, rented, renting.
You will have heard that short E3 is very similar to, but less sharp than, the short I sound of in. It is in fact the same as the short A4 sound of the second A in manage. Add S to make the third person singular of this verb, and the E, formerly silent, becomes short E3, sounding exactly like the preceding short A4, manages.
For short E3 and the similar but sharper short I, you start with your mouth slightly open and make the sound as you raise your chin, the main difference being that for the short E3 you raise your chin vertically, whereas for the short I sound you pull your chin backwards as you raise it, widen and pull back your lips slightly, and feel the air right at the back of your palate, further back than for short E3. A good example of the two sounds coming one after the other in the same word is the verb evict.
Listen again as we make all four sounds in order, then the examples you heard before, again with short I marked as sound 4. I, rent, renter, rented, renting.
Evict, ineffective. Now you practice these sounds and words, and do practice them several times until you're completely attuned to them and can pronounce them confidently.
The following words are also useful for comparing the sounds. Defend,
Which has short E3 then short E1,
defensive,
which has the equivalent sounds in the first two syllables and short I in the third,
and differ.
which has short I in the first syllable and short E2 in the second.
Listen to them again, together with evict and ineffective.
Defend,
Defensive,
differ,
evict.
ineffective.
Now you practice saying those words.
We also find short E3 in the prefix BE in words like because, become and beside, in all of which you will find that the prefix, whose E is shown in italics, is only lightly stressed compared with the second syllable.
When short E3 is the first letter of a word, it is always itself lightly stressed and is followed by a syllable which bears the main stress of the word, as in effect and event, in both of which the strongly stressed second E is short E1, the very opposite of a word like ended.
You will find that an initial short E3 is followed by any of the consonants F, J, L, M, N, Q, R, S and V. Here are some more examples. Effect,
Effective,
eject,
elect,
elusive,
emerge,
emetic,
emaciated,
emit,
emission,
enamel,
enunciate,
equate,
equality,
erect,
erotic,
erupt,
establish,
estate,
event,
evict.
evolve.
Contrast this initial short E3 with examples of an initial E which, though followed by one of those same consonants, also carries the main stress of the word and is therefore either short E1, as in the nouns effort, energy, equity and estimate, or occasionally long E1, as in the adjective equal.
And note that a word like endeavour is not an exception, because the first and second syllables are both strongly stressed.
Here's a little sentence in which every initial E is short E3. Events eventually evolve effectively, establishing equality.
Now you say the list of words beginning with short E3 and this short sentence, which I fear is untrue.
Another place where we commonly hear short E3 is in the ES ending of certain words when it is either the plural ending of a noun or the third person singular of the present tense of a verb, as in the sentence, "He beaches his boats on these beaches."
And we find it again in the apostrophe S possessive endings, as in, "This beach's soft sand." We need now to examine these ES and apostrophe S endings in detail.
We can start by noting that in all cases where a final S follows short E3, it has the hard S sound that is also made by the letter Z. However, the conditions governing these endings differ, in particular concerning the rules for possessives.
Looking first at the third person singular of verbs and the plural of nouns, we can find at least one reliable rule, which is as follows.
The ES ending has the short E3 sound followed by a hard S sound when the basic word, by which we mean the singular form in the case of nouns and the first person singular in the case of verbs, ends in one of the following soft consonants or consonant combinations.
CE, as in face and race, which make faces and races.
Soft CH, as in reach and stitch, which make reaches and stitches.
GE, as in cage and edge, which make cages and edges.
Double S, as in class and pass, which make classes and passes.
SE, as in course and nurse, which make courses and nurses.
SH, as in splash and dish, which make splashes and dishes.
And X and Z, as in fix and fizz, which make fixes and fizzes.
You'll have seen that in some cases the E is already there, albeit silent, because it is needed to make the preceding consonant soft, as in race or rage. So for the plural of the noun or the third person singular of the verb, it needs only to find its voice and become a sounded short E3, as in races and rages.
Or we could look at it another way and say that the silent E is dropped and the ES ending is added with sounded short E3 and a hard S.
Note, however, that it is only where the basic word ends with one of the word endings we have listed that we have the plurals of nouns and the third person singular of verbs with such ES endings. In the plural of the nouns feed or fear, for example, and the third person singular of their related verbs, there is no insertion of a short E3, simply the addition of the hard S to make feeds and fears.
But listen now to some more examples of the ES endings with short E3. Places,
Slices,
perches,
catches,
hitches,
ages,
edges,
cases,
curses,
crashes,
mixes,
dazes,
fuses,
uses.
uses. Now you practice saying those words, noting that all of them can be either plurals of nouns or the third person singular of verbs.
Except for the last two where the first S has a different sound in the noun uses and the verb uses.
And note two other things before we start on the possessives.
The first is that not all plurals are formed by adding S or ES, even with Old English words rather than, say, words derived from Latin.
The plural of spouse, for example, is spouses, but the plurals of mouse and louse are mice and lice, and sheep is both singular and plural.
Second, remember that the short E3 sound in words like peaches and ridges is not the same as the sound of IE in the plural noun and third person singular verb endings of words like fancies or bellies, which have the full short I sound.
This was a point we made when we were describing the short A4 sound, which is the same sound as short E3. The word images gives a perfect demonstration. Contrast the full short I sound in the first syllable with the different sound made in the second and third, in which it is made by short A4 and short E3 respectively.
With regard to the possessives, where the apostrophe s is added to make the singular possessive form, as in birds, peaches and bridges,
Or the apostrophe is simply added by itself to an existing plural s, as in birds, peaches or bridges, this being the plural form when whatever we are talking about belongs to more than one bird, peach or bridge.
there is no difference in sound between the normal plural form of the word and possessive form, whether singular or plural. Let me show you what we mean. The normal plurals of bird and bridge are birds and bridges, and their possessive forms sound exactly the same whether singular or plural. Birds and birds have the same sound as birds, and bridges and bridges are indistinguishable in sound from bridges.
We'll have more to say on the possessives when we get to the letter S. For the present we'll have a practice sentence in which all the short E3 and similar short A4 sounds are marked in italics. Listen carefully and note the spelling of the words.
Especially that there is no apostrophe in its, the possessive case of it, which is one of our language's relatively few inflected words, i.e. words that change their form according to case, as with he and his, a subject on which we'll have more to say when we get to the vowel I.
He leases the 3 villages' buses and coaches, fetches tourists' baggage, teaches his niece's friends physics, and manages Sandwich's golf courses, both its beaches' boats and its harbours' barges.
You practice this now, and when you've done it, I'd like you to note and count the singulars and plurals in all the possessives in the sentence before you continue.
Now check to see if you got the numbers of singular and plural possessives right. There are 4 of each.
The plural possessives are villages, tourists, nieces and beaches.
And the singular ones are the nouns sandwiches and harbours, and the pronouns his and its. I hope you remembered its.
And now we'll have a mixture of examples of short E3 when it is not the first letter in a word, every short E3 being shown in italics.
Blended, ended, scented, cemented.
Because, become, bedeck, befall, befit, befitted, before, beget, begin, begrudge.
Beguile, behave, behind, belated, believe, bequest, beside, betray, beware, bewail, beneath, beside, bestride.
Deceive, defended, defer, demote, depend, derive, describe, deserve, destroy, detach, develop, device, devise, pretty.
Paces, hemorrhages, riches, matches, pages.
Pledges, wedges, bridges, ridges.
Buses, curses, ashes, flashes, dishes, relishes, rushes, bosses, losses.
Fixes, foxes, mazes, whizzes.
Now you practice some of those words.
And now here's a sentence to put some of those words to work.
He believes Pretty Betty Trench's wretched dependent's expenses are what effectively causes her deceived boss's losses.
Oh dear, I wonder what's been going on here. Now you tell us what he believes causes the boss's losses.
Now, do you remember the difference between the verb rebel, which has unstressed short E3 followed by stressed short E1, and the noun rebel, which has stressed short E1 followed by the unstressed short E2 ivy sound? This little word, in its verb and noun forms, has all three of our short E sounds. So let's put it into a sentence, together with its adjective, rebellious.
The rebellious rebels rebelled recklessly in the rebellion.
Now you say that tongue twister, and after practicing it with the help of the markings, make sure you can also read it correctly from the following plain text.
The prefixes pre and re can both have the short E3 sound as they do in precise, review, and the verb rebel, but they can also have short E1 as in precious and the noun rebel, and long E1 as in prehistoric and remake.
Again, it is largely a matter of the degree of stress, as in the case of the initial short E1 in effort and the short E3 of emit. We'll wait until we have done long E1, then give these two prefixes subsections of their own.
For the present, let's do another sentence to practice the three short E sounds together. Watch and listen to me first. Regardless of expense, trendy Len Becker nevertheless belatedly sent Pretty Betty a different, less emetic scent.
The effect of stress is nicely demonstrated in the two words ending in LESS. The unstressed ending of regardless has the short E2 ivy sound, and the stressed ending of nevertheless has short E1, as does the equally strongly stressed first syllable.
In contrast, the short E3 in the first syllable of regardless, though not as completely devoid of stress as the last syllable, is relatively unstressed compared with the second syllable.
Listen to these words again. Regardless. Nevertheless. Now it's your turn to say the sentence about trendy Len Becker's sending a second, different bottle of scent to Pretty Betty after she had evidently been less than impressed by the first, which was sicklier to the point of being emetic.
I dread to think what the first bottle of scent must have smelt like. It's amazing he got the chance to send another, however good, after such a terrible start.
It's not an easy sentence, but it is very important to understand the differences between these three short E sounds. So please practice it again and again until you have it right and can read it fluently and confidently from the unmarked text.
Short E3 is one of the two main sounds of E in the definite article. The other is the short E2 ivy sound, and which is appropriate depends on the first sound in the word that follows it.
When the following word begins with a vowel, you use short E3. Listen to these examples. The attack,
The end,
the incident,
the owner.
the umpires.
The sound of the definite article is short E2, the ivy sound, when the following word begins with a consonant.
And we include in the definition of consonant for this purpose, as with the rule for the indefinite article, a vowel or vowel combination that makes the sound of the consonant Y, as in use, eulogy, and U, or the initial W sound of one. We'll call such initial sounds consonant equivalents.
Listen to some examples. The bar,
The car,
the plane.
the use.
Watch and listen as we make the two sounds again, alternating short E2 and short E3. The former, the ivy sound, shown in italics. The, The beginning, the end.
The beginning, the end. Now you practice the following examples, the first group having short E2 and the second short E3.
Next we must note two possible pronunciations of the definite article with the word hotel. This word can be pronounced with a sounded or a silent H, and the sounds of the definite and indefinite articles change accordingly.
Listen carefully as we give you both pronunciations, the silent H being shown in square brackets. A hotel, the hotel.
An hotel, the hotel. Now you say those alternatives, exactly as we said them. As we said, both are acceptable, though it is preferable to use the sounded H, as keeping the French silent H can seem rather affected.
Now listen to a sentence using the sounded H.
The umpire went to the Union Hotel.
Did you notice the difference between the first and second definite articles? Although each comes before a word beginning with the letter U, the first comes before the vowel U and thus has the short E3 sound, whereas the U following the second is the consonant equivalent, which gives the definite article the short E2 sound. Now you tell us that the umpire went to the Union Hotel.
Now, we said at the beginning that there were two main pronunciations of the definite article, which will have indicated to you that there is at least one more.
This is the emphatic form, which is pronounced with the full long E1 sound and is used to emphasize that something is very special or unique. I could say, for example, the Grand and the White Swan are good, but the Majestic is the hotel in this area.
However, as this is so much and so wrongly overused these days, just as the indefinite article suffers from having its short A2 so often and so wrongly made into a long A1, we shall come back to this point when we get to the long E1.
Before we leave the short E sounds for the long ones, there's one glorious exception to all we have said so far, and nothing could be more appropriate than this one to a language with so many eccentricities of pronunciation and exceptions to almost every rule.
It is the word England and its adjective, English, the very thing that this course is all about.
The initial E in these words has none of the short E sounds we've been practicing.
It obviously can't be short E2 or short E3 because of its heavy stress, but it isn't short E1 either.
It is unique, having the full short I sound of the first letter in ingle, which is an old word for a fireplace and still found in the term inglenook.
Meaning a place to sit within a huge old-fashioned hearth.
Let's practice it with a prejudiced and provocative comment. Listen.
England's English is infinitely better than America's.
Now you say that sentence, making the E in England and English sound exactly like all the letters I.
I have to say I agree with that statement, but then I'm prejudiced. I hope you found our study of the short E sounds interesting and enjoyable, as well as useful. When you continue, you'll find Andy and Lucy waiting to take us through the long sounds that the letter E can make.